Welcome to the CCN Mexico Report podcast, an overview of Mexican legal, business, and political developments presented by the international law firm of Cascio, Cavazos & Newton. The content presented is for information and educational purposes only and should not be understood as legal advice.
Welcome to the CCN Mexico Report. I'm Rob Barnett. In this month's 300 Palabras, Dr. Mario Melgar Adalid writes of strengthening relations between Mexico and the United States. The annual North American Leaders Summit is somewhat of a formality, involving a meeting of the presidents of Mexico and the United States and the Prime Minister of Canada. This year's meeting was held recently in Mexico City, where the leaders demonstrated a spirit of cooperation and mutual understanding. Diplomacy is more than good manners and friendly gestures. It involves hard work in different areas. One of them is the work carried out by the Mexican Consular Corps, assigned to positions in 50 cities throughout the United States, representing the large number of Mexicans living in the United States. Every year, Mexico's Department of Foreign Affairs brings together these consuls general in Mexico City to exchange ideas, projects, and points of view for the purpose of strengthening one of their least visible, most important tasks, the protection of Mexicans abroad. This year, the agenda covers crucial aspects of the relationship between the two countries. In this way, consular representatives working in the North American region will carry out a work program to include basic aspects in criminal and immigration matters, how to react in crisis situations such as shootings, attention to vulnerable groups and victims of human rights violations, and preventive protection instruments, including mental health services for consular personnel. The topics to be discussed provide a clear idea of the importance of consular work. It is hoped that they will enjoy success in their meeting, which will benefit this important bilateral relationship. In Termómetro Político, Dr. Mario Melgar Adalid writes that the 2023 elections that will take place in the state of Mexico, or Estado de Mexico, and Coahuila will serve as a prelude to what may happen in 2024's presidential election. The state of Mexico is one of the most important federal entities in the country, if not the most important. It has the largest population with almost 17 million inhabitants, followed only by Mexico City with 9 million. It has the highest population density in the country with 174 people per square kilometer. It also shares a suburban border with the country's capital and features a large industrial base. The elections will take place on June 4th in both the state of Mexico and Coahuila, where the PRI has historically governed. For this reason, the PRI will have at stake in these two elections a good part of its political future. If the party loses elections in both states, it risks further abandonment by the electorate. If it manages to win one or both states, it can hope for a better future for what was once a previously invincible political force. In accordance with the arrangements made by the Alianza Va por México, comprised of the PRI, PAN, and PRD parties, the PRI will set the guidelines for the elections in the state of Coahuila and the state of Mexico, while the PAN will do so for Mexico City and for the presidential election in 2024. At present, matters are not looking encouraging for the PRI candidate in the state of Mexico. Polls give Morena's candidate, Professor Delfina Gomez, a wide lead over Alejandra del Moral, the PRI candidate. Delfina Gomez received over 47% in a recent poll of potential voters, while Del Moral barely reached 22%. The state of Coahuila shares a border with Texas, and its economy has historically been based on mining, even though agricultural activity and the production of vehicles and construction materials such as steel and cement are giving it a notable economic boost. Coahuila is the main producer in Mexico of barite, coke, iron, fluorspar, and iron pellets, in addition to occupying third place in the country as a producer of gold and silver. In Coahuila, the scenario is less serious for the PRI. the candidate of the Va por Mexico Alliance, Manolo Jimenez, reached 41% in a recent poll, while Armando Guadiana, the candidate of Morena, reached 26%, and Ricardo Mejia, who broke from the Morena Alliance into the Partido del Trabajo, or PT, had just 16%. The results in June will provide an opportunity to make forecasts for expected results of the national election to be held in 2024, which will decide who will govern the country during the 2024 to 2030 six-year election term. CCN attorney Enrique Gil writes that a new decree has terminated air cargo operations at Mexico City's Benito Juarez International Airport. In February of this year, a decree was published in the Official Journal of the Federation ordering the termination of domestic and international air cargo transport operations, both regularly scheduled and unscheduled flights, at Mexico City's International Airport, or AICM. The decree grants a period of 108 business days for concessionaires and permit holders that provide scheduled and unscheduled domestic and international transportation services, exclusively for cargo, to relocate their operations away from the AICM, and this term ends on July 5, 2023. It is important to note that concessionaires and permit holders that provide combined passenger and cargo services are exempt from the closure, provided that cargo is transported in the same aircraft as their passengers. It is worth noting that even though the decree does not expressly state this, the apparent intent is to transfer air cargo operations to the Felipe Ángeles International Airport, or AIFA, located in the municipality of Zumpango de Ocampo in the state of Mexico. As noted, concessionaires and permit holders that provide scheduled and unscheduled passenger air transportation services to the public may choose to continue to do so at any airport they wish. It is also important to consider that both the Latin American and Caribbean Air Transport Association and the International Air Transport Association, or IATA, have stated that the termination of air cargo operations could cause disruption in Mexico's economy and affect supply chains, since the new AIFA airport still does not have the necessary technical requirements to receive the cargo currently received at AICM. This could affect Mexico's participation in international trade. Dr. Mario Melgar Adalid writes that Mexico Supreme Court President Justice Norma Piña has recently been elected. The new year brought positive news for the Mexican judicial system and the continued stability of the balance of powers within the Mexican government. As per the authority of the plenary session of Mexico's Supreme Court, the justices elected Justice Norma Piña as their president for the 2023-2026 term, as provided by constitutional rules. She is the first woman to hold this high office, which has been received with great enthusiasm by both the president and by Mexican society as a whole. Justice Piña has a career in the Mexican judicial system, which has engendered a sense of professional affection from district judges and circuit magistrates who consider her as someone, quote, of their own. The president of the Supreme Court does not have a formal hierarchy with respect to the other justices. This is technically known in Latin as primus inter pares, which means first among equals. However, the role has plenty of other relevant functions. The organic law of the judiciary of the Federation authorizes her, among other things, to represent the Supreme Court. Another relevant power is that when she considers a matter as questionable or important, she may designate a justice as first reviewer to submit a draft opinion to the court's plenary group. From an administrative standpoint, the Chief Justice manages the Supreme Court of Justice and must submit to the President of the Republic annual budget proposals for expenses of the federal judiciary as a whole, as well as managing the budget of the Supreme Court. As Chief Justice, Justice Piña presides over the Federal Judicial Council, the entity in charge of the administration, disciplinary system, and judicial careers of the federal judiciary. The professional background and voting record that Justice Norma Piña has issued in her past performance appears to ensure that she will safeguard the independence of the federal courts and the autonomy of jurisdictional entities in Mexico, including the Mexican Supreme Court of Justice, over which she now presides. Her appointment is very good news for judges and litigants throughout Mexico. CCN attorney Enrique Gil writes that the USMCA Arbitration Panel has issued a final report interpreting North American automotive rules of origin. An arbitration panel established in accordance with Article 31 of the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, or USMCA, has published its final report regarding the enforcement and interpretation of important provisions governing the rules of origin applicable to the automotive industry under the USMCA. It should be noted that on August 20th, 2021, Mexico's government requested consultations with the government of the U.S. as to the interpretation and application of Articles 3 and 4.5, fourth paragraph, regarding regional value content and the uniform regulations of the USMCA. Such request for consultations was also joined by the Canadian government. In general terms, the arguments of the Mexican and Canadian governments is that under the provisions of the USMCA, if a good contains non-originating materials and qualifies as originating under the USMCA, the value of those non-originating materials should not be considered in the calculation of the regional value content, or RVC, of the goods into which said materials have been incorporated. In other words, if a good is produced in a country that is a party to the USMCA and said good qualifies as originating, that good will be considered 100% originating when it is used in the production of another good. This is commonly known as the roll-up rule. However, under the interpretation of the U.S. government, the regional value content calculation of a vehicle and the calculation of this RVC of, quote, essential parts of a passenger vehicle or light truck must be made separately and independently of each other. In other words, under the U.S. interpretation, even when an essential part qualifies as originating, if it contained non-originating materials, these must be subtracted out when calculating the regional value content of the vehicle. This interpretation is reflected in the letters of approval of the alternative staging regime issued by the U.S. government to producers in the automotive sector. In its final report, dated December 14, 2022, the USMCA Arbitration Panel issued its decision in accordance with the interpretation of the Mexican and Canadian governments, stating that the roll-up rule is applicable to the calculation of regional value content of a vehicle, and that, contrary to the U.S. government's position, the USMCA does not allow vehicle manufacturers to consider the essential parts of a finished vehicle, including the engine, transmission, and chassis, as originating, as long as such parts comply separately with a minimum percentage of regional value content, 75%. The USMCA panel's decision means the U.S. government must abide by the final report of the arbitration panel within a 45-day period after it received notification of the decision. In any case of non-compliance with the final report, the Mexican and Canadian governments may suspend USMCA treaty benefits on imports from the United States in an equivalent amount of the damages they have sustained, which will apply until a final resolution among the parties has been reached.
Thank you for joining us for this edition of the CCN Mexico Report podcast. Subscribe to the CCN Mexico Report newsletter at www.ccn-law.com to receive the full text of this edition's articles. This podcast is copyrighted 2022 by Cascio Cavazos & Newton, LLP. All rights reserved.